Welcome back, everybody. Great to see you. Back to the Harbor YouTube channel. We are back after a 2-week break. All of us got off to wild and exotic places like Wild Goose and stuff, but we are back and we are having a special Harbor summer program. And we're changing things up a little bit like we like to do in the summer. And so, John, why don't you tell us a bit about what we're doing this summer and how things went last night?
Yeah, well, so one change is that for the rest of the summer, our Thursday night gatherings, we're doing 1 hour together on Zoom. Normally, other times of the year, we've done an hour and a half. So kind of nice summer vibe, just like, a little bit shorter of a time together on Zoom. But the discussions we're having this summer are inspired by this book, Woven by Meredith Miller. And the tagline of the book, the subtitle of the book is Nurturing a Faith Your Kid Doesn't Have to Heal From. There you go. You don't have the blur. So your title, yeah, there you go. Um, but it's funny, so the book is about kind of nurturing faith in kids, but it also really applies to our own faith that we are nurturing. And one of the reasons I think we were excited to do this at Harbor this summer is that the central metaphor of this book is very relevant to the journey that most of us are on here at Harbor. That we often use words like faith deconstruction, maybe faith reconstruction. And so Meredith Miller takes the title of the book Woven from the idea of spider webs. She says that a lot of times we think of building faith. We're thinking of building a house or a fortress, a castle, maybe a house of cards, you might say. But we're building this structure of our faith, not only in our own journeys, but in our kids that we're raising or leading in ministries. And then inevitably, a faith crisis will come someday. And some part of the belief system we will realize was wrong, was harmful, whatever the case may be. And if we've built things up to be like a Jenga tower of our faith, then when one or two things turn out to be bad, or more than one or two things, then it all comes crashing down. And this is painful. This is painful on many different levels, as most of us know. And so, what Meredith Miller is suggesting is maybe a different metaphor would be more helpful. Maybe we think about the way a spider web weaves, a spider weaves its web. It's not this layer after layer of a building. It's strands that are woven together. And there's a few central strands that are important, that are stronger, that you hope will never break or snap. But most of the web will be end up at one time or another being broken off, being swept away. And because just the core is flexible enough and pliable enough, it might remain, and then the spider can rebuild only the parts that have been damaged and maybe into something new, maybe a different type, different structure of web. And so this idea that if we're flexible with our faith, if we really ground it in some basic, healthy theological ideas, then it can stand the test of time in our kids' journeys and even in our own journeys. So that's a bit of what we're going to be talking about this summer. What are some of the main sort of central strands of the web we might weave? And so we looked at our first theological strand at our last Harbor meeting, and that strand is the idea that God is good. So we looked at the creation account in Genesis 1. We read a translation of it from Meredith Miller, the way she would teach this story to a group of children. And we read that, and then she pulls out quite a few themes of what can you observe in this story that points you to goodness and that points you to God's goodness that we can believe in and that won't need to come tumbling down someday if our faith ever deconstructs or runs into a crisis. And so the two specific aspects of God's goodness in this story that we discussed at Harbor at our meeting were about diversity, the idea that God creates an incredibly diverse world. So much natural diversity, human diversity, and then also the idea of life-giving words, the idea that God is speaking these different parts of creation into existence. And that what we do with our words is very different from that, but we also have power in our words, and we have the power to give life in a way through encouragement and through love in our words that we share with one another. So we talked about diversity and we talked about words that give life. And Yeah, I thought it was a really fun meeting, and it was really good to be back after our little summer break.
It really was. And listening to one of our elders, who's also a grandfather, read that parts of that story was just, that was wonderful. It's just, we have such an intergenerational community, and that is such a gift.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, our discussion room, again, because of the shortness of time, we're experimenting a little bit. So our discussion was shorter. Um, and so we had only two questions, where normally we would have like five or six. And it was, so we had that more kind of focused. Um, so we looked at these two questions about diversity and goodness. And I think in your group too, or actually it was you that mentioned something about everybody wants to talk about birds these days, because birds were in ours too, like just, sitting in your yard, or even sometimes like just sitting on the bus, and you can hear or see like just so many birds everywhere. And also, so that's just one example of, and just so many different environments all around the world. Um, and just wonder, like another person said, there 90% of the species that have gone extinct in his, like 90% of the species that ever existed ever are now extinct. And there are still, someone's, don't, so please fact check me on this, but it was either like 50 or 500 million species
Wow.
that exist right now. And so just I love the creation story, which is a big part of my research. So I spent a lot of time in it. I love the huge and the small
Hmm.
all at once. That diversity, and that strength of the big and the small,
Yeah.
which happen you see in spider webs too, like just these incredibly strong but also very fine, um, webs.
Yeah. Something I observed in our discussion room too is, human diversity is so remarkable. If you just look at a community like Harbor, like, in a sense, it's a little bit sad, but a reality is like, as far as a group of humans goes, we're not the most diverse group, right? Like there are certain dimensions along which we have some things in common that most of the folks at Harbor. But even in a community that's a little bit less diverse in some ways, like ours, there's other ways where we are so rich in diversity, and the personalities and the life experiences and the senses of humor. And it's just such an amazing mixture. And then I made that remark in the discussion room. And then later in the after party, someone noted in the chat just the list of different topics that we had talked about. And they were like, yeah, it does seem like a pretty diverse group. Because we were kind of all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. When we talked about, uh, words that give life, um, one of the folks in our group, um, she works in a public, services, agency in her city, and she talked about the power um, of words with the clients that she works with, um, and just she talked about using a strengths based model, and how so many of the folks that she encounters every day just have so many obstacles that they are facing, and they just kind of, get it wrong, or things go wrong for them all of the time. And she sees on a regular basis the power of saying, but wow, like, you, like, last week you were here, now you're here, like that's amazing, and you did that. And to see just how that person lifts, by just shifting, not taking away the struggle, or dismissing it, but saying, but you've also overcome these obstacles. And that's where God's goodness, that's where we see God's goodness. And that's the part that keeps us strong.
Mm,
Um, which yeah, that was I just it was a lot. It was just one of those really. I've been getting a lot of those reminders lately. So thanks, John, about just the power of giving a word of appreciation and a word of
Mm.
of just noticing people, and how powerful that can be.
Yeah. Yeah, when we talked about that topic in my room, something I thought was funny, but it was also really sweet happened. Those of you out there who don't know this running joke, the third Harbor co-pastor who is not here, Dottie, we joke that she's a bully. And just to unpack this joke for a second, Dottie is so empathetic, so thoughtful and sweet, not a bully at all, but she can get very sarcastic in joking and especially liking to make fun of me.
And
So,
competitive.
yeah. So, she's not at all a bully, but it's a fun joke to make because she does get a little feisty sometimes. And so, one of our people at Harbor, we were talking about who in your life speaks words that are life-giving. And this person said, despite her reputation as a bully, Dottie is really good at speaking encouraging words and affirming words. And so shout out to Dottie. Couldn't be here today on this
Absolutely.
video, but we love Dottie.
We do. Yeah. And she speaks life-giving words to you and I all the time.
Definitely.
Yeah, so grateful for her.
Hmm.
Well, that was a great way to kick off the summer. And I'm still feeling just really buoyed and just pleasant is a word, like just feeling really good coming out of last night, which is good because we were talking about goodness. So, John, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Good chatting with you.